To point out again this morning, the Wall Street Journal has an op-ed by one of its writers in the editorial page, Jason Riley, saying, effectively, Mr. Trump, it's time to walk away from this issue. Declare victory. The border is secure. That's what you promised during the campaign. But now you've replaced chaos at the border, which has been quieted, with chaos in the streets. It's not good politically. It's not good for the economy. Just walk away. That's from the Wall Street Journal again this morning. President Trump spoke to supporters in Iowa yesterday, delivering a speech touting what he claims the success of his economic policies. The president did not mention the recent fatal shootings of those two people, those American citizens in Minneapolis, by federal agents. But he repeated his claims that protests there are being put on by what he called paid agitators. Joining us now live from Des Moines, Iowa, senior White House reporter at MS Now, Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, good morning. You were at the rally. What'd you hear?
There's an uncomfortability in the denial of the reality, Willie. Being inside of that room yesterday outside of Des Moines, it felt like we could have been standing in 2024, not a moment in which the country was reeling from the video in which Alex Preddy's death has led to protests in sub-freezing conditions across Minneapolis and other parts of the country. There was no mention of Renee Good. There was no mention of Alex Preddy. There was no direct mention of the operations and the uncomfortable questions about the constitutional rights of Americans and individuals in this country that may be here as on a legal status basis or even undocumented. But instead, what you saw from the president was him dancing to the YMCA. And I think it's notable. 1 week ago, guys, we had a conversation about protests happening in countries overseas, in places of longtime U.S. allies, and some of those foreign leaders standing up and expressing that this was the moment to no longer allow leniency for the American president. And while we are seeing that happen in the streets around America, inside of that room last night, the likely U.S. Senate candidate out of Iowa was standing there cheering him on. The likely gubernatorial candidate from Iowa was there. Two Republicans in Congress who faced tough battles this November were in the room. Mariannette Miller Meek, she won her race in 2024 by just 800 votes. But when she spoke before the president from that podium, she told the folks in that crowd that she felt like giving the middle finger salute to the protesters outside of the venue. We were out there right before the president took the stage, and there were hundreds of Iowans protesting his arrival with signs about the killing of Alex Preddy and these deportation operations that are unfolding. And we saw that there were two protesters in that room that were kicked out. There was one of them dropped his phone, and a supporter of the president picked it up and smashed it to the ground. The president calling the protesters paid agitators, a sort of lack of humanity or humility for what the country has been watching very clearly. I want to let you listen to two folks that we talked to away from the event venue, random folks that had previously voted for Donald Trump, Marcia and Michael, in their reflection on what's been unfolding. Take a listen. He had talked about mass deportations, immigration, crackdowns. Is that something you wanted at one point?
Not like they're doing.
Not like this.
Not like this. This is horrible. Just horrible. I'm sick to my stomach.
Does what you see make you uncomfortable?
Yeah, I mean, I think anytime someone gets shot in the street, you should be uncomfortable and ask how we got to that point and what we can do to not get to that point again. It's happened twice, so something clearly isn't working. The rules are there. They need to be enforced, but you can't be shooting people in the street either.
And guys, we've been over the last decade talking to folks and asking them to effectively respond to words and actions of this president and his administration. And we have seen, in turn, the president try to condition his supporters, whether it be through the pandemic or whether it be in how they respond to the January 6th attack on the Capitol. But this moment is different because, like those folks that you talked to, everybody has seen the images and understands, as Lana, another past Trump supporter, told us, the way that she says that she feels like he did a great job during his first administration, but now he views himself as a god. Those were the words of Lana, a former Trump voter here in Iowa, who, in these conversations, that folks are reckoning with the reality that there are Americans that have been killed in their streets for simply protesting. And I think that this is a moment that clearly, based off of the responses from the likes of the president himself, but also Stephen Miller, there is a realization that folks on the ground, months before these midterms, are viewing this in a way that the president, a decade into his political tenure, is having a hard time convincing Americans to not believe what they're seeing with their own eyes.
MS Now's Vaughn Hilliard with great reporting on the ground there in Des Moines, Iowa. Vaughn, thanks so much. We always appreciate it. John, as you know better than anybody, Donald Trump's philosophy often has been just survive the day. There might be a firestorm today. We'll change the subject tomorrow. These things pass, they go away in our current political media culture. But this isn't going away. And as much as they want to dismiss these protesters as paid agitators, these are people upset about what's happening in their communities, upset about watching U.S. citizens effectively executed in the streets of their cities. So is there any chance that he listens to the Wall Street Journal? Is there any chance he listens to Fox News hosts or some Republican senators, not a lot of them, some of them, who say, the border is secure, you did that job, bravo to you, but this is not working for you?
No, at least not yet. I mean, the border is secure, and they take a victory lap on that, but that's only a piece of his plan. It was these deportations, mass deportations. That's what they had to do, and they very quickly went beyond just putting out the worst of the worst. Like it's just people who have lived, in many cases, people who lived in America a long time, being plucked from school lines or Home Depots or the like. There is a acknowledgement, though, this is a bit of a political crisis. And as I wrote for The Atlantic last night, it's not that there were all that many Republicans who spoke up angrily, but there were just so many. Like, it wasn't about anger, it was about volume. There were so many who put out just statements of concern. You know, we should have an investigation. This should be reevaluated. That eventually that sheer number caught the White House's attention. The pushback from the NRA, and we'll get into that a little later, about his comments about guns, also really spooked Trump. People close to him have told me. And they recognize the images out of Minnesota, which, look, Trump, like all the rest of us, David, spent the whole weekend battered by a winter storm, snowbound, many of us across the country. What do? You're inside. You're stuck watching television. You're looking at your phone. Trump saw the images, and he saw how people on his staff tried to describe the images, and they simply didn't match up to reality. Now, publicly, Trump, as he always does, is trying to downplay, is trying to move on. But I'm told that's what led to some of these changes in Minnesota, though we don't know what happens next.
And I think there's a change. The big challenge for the president is how he carries out his policies. Stephen Miller set a quota for ICE arrests. That's the key thing driving so much of this approach. And there was an idea of just scaring people into leaving the country. And to go back to Greenland last week and now Iran, which we'll talk about later, Trump is about, escalation, threatening and menacing people. And that doesn't actually solve so many of these problems, and it seems to be alienating so many Americans. And Europeans stood up to Trump, if you will, last week over Greenland, and he backed down. And Americans, people in Minneapolis, stood up to Trump this week, and he's backing down. And it's this core question about Trumpism. Can he implement? He's got this tiny circle around him, much smaller than the first term, and what's happening in that echo chamber.